this bill puts in place an enabling framework to impose economic regulation, and one of those uses would be in the gas market on Manx gas.
So you mentioned there Manx gas. Is it just applicable to that, or is this something that would solve a range of issues potentially?
Potentially a range of issues. So this is actually an enabling piece of legislation. It provides the framework if it goes to plan. I would very much hope that government would support this private member's bill. And essentially, if I get it through on Tuesday, it gives me time to go and sit with the legislative drafters to give them instructions about legislation. I would hope to come back very quickly with legislation to consider in the House of Keys alongside the competition bill that government's just introducing this Tuesday as well.
So is this something that in the long term could see more competition in markets like gas?
No, it's the other way around, actually. So basically, the competition bill is there aiming to keep competition wherever there can be competition. And if, for whatever reason, natural monopoly, some other reason, technological reason, you can't have competition, we've then got to protect the interests of the consumers through an alternative, and that's what economic regulation is. So essentially, the gas negotiations have continued very well, it seems. Members have now seen the draft gas agreement, and this would be one way of making sure that a new regulator can be assigned to enforce what's agreed with Manx gas through the negotiations, but subsequently it could have other use in respect of other monopolies around the island. Competition's always best, but sometimes you can't have competition.
So is this something that could directly affect the ongoing gas negotiations then? Would it be in place in time for that?
That's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping it would be very helpful for government. Minister Harmer is a very pragmatic, consensus-based politician. When he first got elected, I actually sponsored him. I was reminded of it recently. Hope very much to work with government. We've only got 2 months left, but I hope we can get the best outcomes for the gas consumer in the island, but also fair to Manx gas so we can have continuing investment.
So what is the timeline here then? You mentioned 2 months there, but does this have to go out to consultation? Do you have to go through all of those steps?
This has been on the table since 2008. There have been consultations along those time. I'm not planning on consultation. This is a technical bill to put in place technical arrangements, a framework to actually have legislation that's appropriate. The Gas Regulatory Committee considered this. It's been in the programme for government since 2016. It was even in the scope and structure of government back in 2006. No more consultation planned. This is purely and simply to put in place legislation.
You've also got some questions on the gas regulation agreement for next week. There's one asking about costs that were incorrectly calculated or improperly incurred by Manx Gas. What is it that's put that on your radar?
Again, it's all to do with the gas negotiations. Essentially, the Office of Fair Trading misunderstood its role in respect of the gas agreement, particularly in 2017. It took away some rights that customers had. Trying to show that and trying to show that customers do have rights under consumer protection legislation. So what I'm basically saying is that, and also the 2015 gas regulatory agreement is still in place until the end of this year, and that can be used to make sure we get a fair settlement for gas customers. So these questions are to draw out some technicalities, but the most important thing in all of this is putting in place the right arrangements for gas regulation by the end of this year. The time for fighting is over. Now got to work together with government to make sure that we have the right regulation around the agreement that seems to be negotiated nearly completely. There are still some loose ends to do with the size of the assets that will be included in the agreement, to do with the nature of the customers that will be subject to it, to do with how we're going to treat climate change policies. But also another loose end is this economic regulation approach, and that's why I'm trying to be helpful with these questions and this bill to work with government to put in place the best arrangement for customers and also, in fact, for Manx Gas.
Well, you mentioned there about the best for customers and incorrectly calculated fees. Is it a real priority that customers who potentially are out of pocket that this is sorted?
I mean, it is, and at the moment, Manx Gas has said if we can do this arrangement, customers will get their money back. What the purpose of these questions is to show that the customers should get their money back in any case. Manx Gas has already talked about a nearly 14% price reduction for 2020, and I'm trying to make sure that happens regardless of what happens next.
You're also asking about average household bills on the island. What is that information going to help you see?
Well, basically, Manx Gas made a statement about what the price reduction would mean for the average customer. So I'm just trying to see to what extent that average customer bill is accurate, because you have to be fair when you're presenting things to customers, and there has been a habit over the last 4 or 5 years of being some quite misleading statements made in respect of gas pricing, and I'm just trying to make that point.
Who's been making the misleading statements?
Rob Collister always used to suggest that Manx Gas mixed up price reductions and also regulatory adjustments. He was saying that in 2017, 2018. He was right. It has been a very confusing situation for the last 3 or 4 years under the gas regulatory agreement, and what I want is simplicity, so the customer knows how much it's paying, and if the price goes down by 14%, roughly a third of that will be to do with the negotiations on reducing what's called the return on capital employed. A third of that would be to do with the fact that the gas prices have gone down, and a third of that will be to do with the fact that Manx Utilities is cutting its charges to Manx Gas, I believe. But we need to have that on record and on Hansard, so it's authoritative.
Okay, moving on to the Blue Light Hub. You've got a question about that. I think we heard about this over the summer in one of the Tynwald's written questions.
Yep.
Why is it you're seeking more info on that?
2 points. The first one is the Minister said in an oral answer a couple of weeks ago that he couldn't tell us which sites were being considered as feasible for this Blue Light Hub because some of them were in private ownership. I doubt that very much. I doubt whether government would be buying land on which to build a fire station and a police station and so on. So I'm drawing that out. The second point is this is one of a series of 3 or 4 questions to do with some crucial aspects of government policy that haven't developed in the same timescale as the area plan for the East. And planning has to be about citing things like emergency services, schools, making sure the roads are adequate for the new housing that's proposed, making sure that the employment is in the right place for where people live or vice versa. And I've got a series of questions about the Blue Light Hub, about a school in central Douglas, about the TT Access Road, and about sewerage infrastructure on the west of Douglas and Onchan and up into Garth, to make points that still need sorting in the context of the forthcoming decision on the area plan for the East.
Well, you mentioned there that you do have a series of questions about various different facilities. Do these issues around planning, is it not important that they are sorted out before projects like this get announced?
Yeah, and when you plan, the more certainty you have about things like roads and sewerage, the better. And I spoke against quick adoption of the area plan for the East in Tynwald a week or so ago because government hadn't kept up with the plan, in the sense that there were still various unknowns, and there was uncertainty about crucial things like the location of schools and how we're going to get people across the TT course and how we're going to deal with sewerage from certain parts of the island and so on.
What are your thoughts generally on the Blue Light Hub? Do you think it is a good plan to have all of the emergency services in one place, or does it need to be exactly the right place? Will it work?
It needs to be the right place, and I'm sceptical about the need to have them all together. I was responsible as a delegated member for the fire service when we put together both the one in Port Erin and the one in Castletown Maloo, and they were great ideas because they made the place right and they optimised the use of buildings, and it worked for where the population is. Douglas is a bit trickier than that, and I can't see any natural reason why the police station and the fire service need to be together, but the ambulance site seems to me to be difficult in its location, and I do hope that the feasibility study will actually come up with something concrete that can then be taken into account in the planning process more generally.
With the access road as well, is that something that it does need to be moved? Does it need to be more access roads?
Who knows?
What are your thoughts
but it's
there?
such a major decision that I would have thought it would be much easier to have the area plan for the East after we know how we're going to get across the TT course. So are we widening the access road where it is, which is sort of what the inspector suggested needed to happen if some of the houses were going to be built, or does somebody have plans for moving it somewhere else? This is what this question's all about, exploring. I don't know the answers. I've just heard rumours that there are all sorts of alternatives, but they're probably not very well developed, but let's find out.
I know, and with the area plan for the East, there's lots of concern about future population predictions and things like that. How does that impact when it comes to replacing a school?
Very much so. Essentially, we have population projections which are used for planning infrastructure, but also education and health provision. And schools in Douglas tend to be ones that have got more people in them than would be ideal. Schools in the villages tend to have fewer than would be ideal, and we've had new school at Henry Bloom Noble with huge improvements to St Mary's. We've still got a split site at School and Jubilee, and that's what this question's about. It could make sense to build a new school in the next decade at the Park Road site and actually use both of the existing Murray's Road and Ballaquayle sites for housing, for instance. That's what the planning inspector speculated about.
And we have seen in the Douglas area in the last few years, Skullvala Gielt had excess capacity. We saw St Thomas's closed. Does Douglas really need another school?
Well, it's not another school. This would be a replacement for the existing School and Jubilee. So at the moment, it's on 2 sites, and that's the school that's one of them's pretty old. This is a replacement for the school. It's not another school. It's better positioning of the school and making use of the land for housing, which might be in a better place if it's on the existing school sites.
Okay, and just finally, you have a series of written questions about holding the address of a landlord on Mona Street and Tynwald Street. What's that all about?
It's about the landlord private housing bill that's coming forward. A very important part of a good government is making sure that people can tell us information once, and those series of questions are to draw out how many different people have the information I'm asking about, which is the owner and the correspondence address of flats in random places. And after that, I hope to work with the Minister Tim Baker to actually put together a better set of clauses in the landlord bill, so we can actually only get information once and then maintain its accuracy only once. That's one of a series of improvements that the bill needs, and these questions are to draw out information to help him and I work on a better part of that bill.
So as things stand for you at the moment, that bill not ready?
Not quite ready as yet. I agree with the Minister that we need to make progress, but I think we can probably make progress in slightly different ways from that currently envisaged in the bill.
So when you see multiple departments holding information like this, does it all need to be in one department? Does there need to be a separate body that deals with landlords? What is the solution to
this? So we have information for the fire service because they're responsible for fire regulations. We have information at the local authority in one case, but in central government for environmental health things. We have land registry. We have rates database. We obviously have information in the income tax base. No, it doesn't need to all be in one place, but we need to have a system to actually make it usable according to law with consent for a simple purpose like knowing who to follow up with problems with landlord issues, perhaps even tenant issues as well.
Have you had lots of feedback from constituents on the landlords bill? We've certainly been hearing a lot about it here at Manx Radio. Have you heard any concern?
Yeah, very much. I went to the meeting that was last week. I made a brief statement there, and I encouraged them to speak with one voice. So, as I understand it, the Manx Landlord Association went a bit dormant because it was hoping things would develop in one way. They didn't. They developed in this way. Now it's reactivated. I understand they're forming themselves again as in legal terms, and they've got 150, 200 people who were at that meeting, and I encouraged them to speak with one voice, to write down exactly what they wanted, how the bill should be amended, and actually propose that with one voice, and I think that's what they seem to be doing.
Is this legislation a bit overdue?
Some legislation is overdue, but the problem isn't really about legislation. That's the point I'm making with this question about information on ownership and correspondent address. Essentially, we need to improve the quality of the flats and the houses. In some cases, not in most cases. We need to improve the relationship between landlord and tenants in some cases, but not in most cases. We need to support certain people in their housing, to put a roof over the head using what's called the housing first approach. So if your life is in tatters and you need to some help to get it back together again for whatever reason, having a roof over your head helps you hold down a job and helps you hold down relationships and all of those important things. And that's something that we should be working on. So the bill is only a very small part of the solution. It is part of it, but there's so many more fundamental things that we need to do around supported living, around improving the quality of some houses in the Isle of Man. And we've got opportunities like that alongside the bill.